My name is Simone Reyes, and I was 31 years old the morning my mother sent me a text message that I read standing in a parking lot in work boots with dry concrete dust on my jacket. It said, "We'll celebrate when you do something real." I stood there for a moment. I read it twice. Then I put my phone in my back pocket and walked into the building. That text came in on the morning of my contractor's licensing ceremony, the day the state board was about to read out a number that none of my family knew existed, tied to my name, tied to a record that had never been set before in the history of that board. They didn't come.
Not one of them.
My mother, my 4 siblings, nobody. What I want to tell you is what happened inside that room. What the board chair said when he got to my file. What the 2 local news cameras caught. And why, by the time I drove home that afternoon, my phone had more unread messages than I'd received in the previous 6 months combined. I'm not going to gloat. That's not what this is. But I am going to tell you the whole thing from the beginning so you understand what that room felt like. Welcome back to channel, where quiet people let the paperwork do the talking. If you're new here, hit subscribe. New stories post every week. And if something in this one lands for you, drop it in the comments. I read every one. I want to start where everything starts, which is not at the ceremony and not at my mother's text message, but 11 years earlier, in the garage of a house in Fresno, California, on a Saturday morning when I was 20 years old, and my grandfather handed me a voltage tester and told me to find the short in a wall circuit he'd been chasing for 3 days. His name was Ernesto. Everyone called him Neto. He was 68 years old, and he had been an electrician, a plumber, and a general contractor for 40 years before arthritis took the fine work out of his hands. He was the only person in our family who worked with tools for a living and didn't apologize for it. He was also in a family that placed enormous value on college diplomas and professional titles, and the kind of career you could describe in one clean sentence at a dinner party. The only person who had ever looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You have the right kind of mind for this." He didn't mean it as a consolation prize. He meant it the way an engineer means it. He meant that I could see systems. That I could hold a problem in 3 dimensions, trace a fault line backward to its source, think in sequences. He'd noticed it when I was 12 and rewired a lamp without being asked. He'd confirmed it when I was 15 and rebuilt a leaking drain assembly in his bathroom from memory after watching him do it once. My family noticed none of this. What my family noticed was that I did not apply to a 4-year university. That I enrolled instead in a community college vocational program, electrical first, then plumbing, then HVAC and general construction, and that while my siblings were sending out graduation announcements and framing diplomas, I was getting up at 5 in the morning to show up as a second-year apprentice on job sites that paid $11 an hour. My oldest brother, Marcus, was a financial analyst. He had a business degree from a state university and wore collared shirts to family dinners and spoke about his company's quarterly performance in a way that I think he genuinely believed was interesting. He was 35 when I was 21, and he had a particular way of looking past me when family conversations turned to careers. Not hostile, not cruel, just absent. The way you don't look at something that doesn't register as relevant. My sister Denise was a dental hygienist. Good job, steady income, benefits. She'd finished a 2-year program and had been working in the same practice for 8 years. I respected what she did. She did not extend the same courtesy. She had a way of describing my work that compressed it down to something almost invisible. "Simone does construction stuff," and then moving on, as though the sentence had used up all the space the topic deserved. My brother Derek was in graduate school for business administration when I started my apprenticeship. He finished that degree, got a corporate job in Sacramento, and became, over the years, the family's primary reference point for what success looked like. He was polite to me at holidays. Polite the way you're polite to someone you've categorized as not quite a peer. Careful, slightly elevated, never quite meeting your eyes at the same level. And my youngest sibling, my sister Priya, we have the same mother, different fathers, 12 years between us, was still in high school when I was getting my first journeyman certification. By the time she was in college studying communications, I was running small jobs on my own. She looked at me the way young people sometimes look at older siblings who didn't follow the path the family drew, with a kind of secondhand embarrassment, as though my choices reflected on her. My mother's name is Gloria. She is a bookkeeper. She worked for the same accounting firm for 22 years. raised 5 children largely on her own after my father left when I was 8, and built a life on the principle that education, formal, credentialed, documentable, was the only reliable ladder out of the situation she'd been born into. I do not blame her for believing that. I understand exactly where it came from and what it cost her to hold on to it. But understanding something and being unhurt by it are not the same thing. She never said she was ashamed of me. She said things like, "You're smart enough for more than this, Simone." She said, "Your grandfather loved you, but his life was very hard, and I don't want that for you." She said, "A trade is fine for some people," with a particular pause after some people that carried its own full sentence inside it. My grandfather Neto heard all of this, I think. He didn't argue with her. He wasn't the kind of man who argued. He just kept showing up for me in the way that counted, letting me work beside him on weekends, pointing out things I'd missed, telling me when I did something right without making a performance of it. He had a phrase he used when I'd solved something correctly. He'd look at the work, not at me, and he'd say, "Yeah, that'll hold." That was it. That was the whole thing. And somehow that was enough. He died the spring I turned 26. He left me his tools. Not his other grandchildren, me. Specifically me. There was a short letter in the box with them, handwritten on a piece of notebook paper, that said, "These belong to someone who will use them. Use them right." I still have that letter. I have it framed in my office now, which did not exist yet when he died, but which he somehow knew was coming. I want to be precise about what I had built quietly in the years between his death and the morning of that licensing ceremony, because I think the precision matters. I had my journeyman's card in electrical. I had my journeyman's card in plumbing. I had my HVAC certification. I had been working as a licensed subcontractor for 4 years, building a small but real client base, mostly residential remodels, some light commercial, a few small municipal contracts. I had my business registered as a sole proprietorship, Reyes Integrated Trades, and I had been operating it out of a small office I rented month to month in a building near downtown Fresno. I did not talk about the business at family events, partly because it never seemed to land as impressive to them. "She is a little company" was how Denise described it once, and I heard it secondhand, and partly because I had learned, over years of small attempts, that the conversation went nowhere good. I would mention something I'd done, and someone would ask how much money I made, and I would give a real answer, and Marcus would do a brief calculation in his head and say something like, "That's not bad for what you do," and I would spend the rest of the dinner pretending I hadn't heard it. So I stopped bringing it up. I kept the business to myself. I kept my certifications to myself. And I kept, most completely to myself, the thing I had been working on for 18 months, the application process that, if it went through, would make me the first solo woman-owned firm in the state of California to hold contractor certifications in 3 trades simultaneously under a single license. That application was not simple. It required documentation I had been assembling for 2 years. Project histories, financial statements, letters from municipal inspectors, proof of insurance at levels most small contractors don't carry, references from 3 independent licensed engineers who could attest to the quality of completed work. The state board reviewed applications like mine in batches twice a year. I had submitted mine in the prior cycle, been asked for supplemental documentation, resubmitted, and waited. I found out on a Wednesday afternoon in February that I had been approved. The board coordinator called me herself, which she said they didn't usually do, but that the chair had asked her to make a personal call for this one because, and I am quoting her directly, "The file came up in our internal review as something we'd want to acknowledge at the ceremony." I sat in my truck in a parking structure for 20 minutes after that call. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my siblings. I sat there until my hands felt normal again, and then I drove back to the job site I'd left to take the call. The ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday morning, 6 weeks out. I told my family the week before. I told them on a Sunday. I drove to my mother's house. She lives in the house I grew up in a neighborhood in southwest Fresno, and I sat at the kitchen table while she made coffee, and I told her about the certification, about the 3-trade simultaneous license, about the state record. She listened. She had her back to me while I talked, rinsing cups at the sink, and she turned around when I finished, and she said, "That's good, Simone. Is it going to mean more work coming in?" I said yes, I hope so. She said, "Good. You should make sure it pays off." These things cost money to maintain, right? I said yes, there were renewal fees, continuing education requirements. She nodded and set a cup of coffee in front of me and sat down. She asked how long the ceremony was. I said maybe 2 hours. She asked if she needed to dress up. I said it wasn't formal, just a room at the State Licensing Board office in Sacramento, folding chairs, nothing elaborate. She said, Sacramento is a long drive for a Saturday. I looked at her. She was looking at her coffee. I said, it's 2.5 hours. She said, I know. I'm just thinking out loud. She came. Or rather, she said she would try to come, and I believed her, and she did not come. I called Marcus that same week. He was pleasant on the phone. He asked a few questions about the license, what it meant practically, whether it opened up new contract sizes, and then he said something I've thought about many times since. He said, I think what you've built is genuinely impressive, Simone. I just want to make sure you understand that the ceiling on that kind of business is real. You can't scale a trades firm the way you can scale other things. You know that, right? I said I knew. He said, I'm just saying if you ever wanted to think about something with more growth potential, I have contacts. It's not too late to go back to school. I said thank you, and ended the call. Denise's response, when I texted her the date and time, was, I have the kids that weekend. I don't think we can make it all the way to Sacramento. Congrats, though. With a small celebration emoji, the kind you append to messages about things that are fine, but not important. Derek sent a thumbs up. A single thumbs up emoji. Nothing else. Priya, to her credit, sent a longer message. It said she thought it was cool and that she was sorry she couldn't be there. She had a thing and that we should get dinner soon and catch up. The thing she had was not specified. The dinner never happened. My mother's text, the one I read in the parking lot, came in the morning of the ceremony at 7:43 as I was driving north on the 99. I had left at 6 in the morning to be sure I had time. I pulled off at a gas station to read it properly because I'd felt my phone buzz twice and didn't want to look while driving. The first text said, I don't think I'm going to make it today. I've been feeling off all week and a long drive isn't a good idea. I hope it goes well. The second text, sent 4 minutes later, said, We'll celebrate when you do something real. I have spent considerable time since then trying to decide whether she meant it the way it landed. Whether it was thoughtless rather than deliberate, a shorthand that came out wrong, an attempt to be encouraging that misfired badly. I've gone back and forth. I've landed, finally, on the position that intent and impact are both real things, and that what she sent me, whatever she meant by it, was a message that said, This is not real. You have not done a real thing. I read it twice. I put my phone in my back pocket. I drove the rest of the way to Sacramento. I want to be clear about the specific texture of what I felt in the car for those remaining 90 minutes. I did not cry. I did not feel that particular sharp collapse of something, that thing that happens when you're surprised. I wasn't surprised. That's the part one keep coming back to. I was not surprised. I had been training myself for years not to be surprised by this family's estimation of me. What I felt was more like a door closing, a quiet, final click. The sound of a decision I had been approaching for a long time, arriving. I put on a podcast. I drove. I got to Sacramento and parked and walked into the State Licensing Board office at 9:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before the ceremony started. There were 26 other license recipients in the room. Some had brought families, spouses, parents, kids sitting on the folding chairs swinging their feet. There were photographers with cameras on straps, a few local press badges I noticed near the back. I signed in at the desk and took a seat in the second row, alone, with my jacket over my arm. I knew nobody in that room. Nobody in that room knew me. That was fine. The ceremony was run by the board chair, a man named Robert Calloway. He was probably 60, silver-haired, the kind of state official who has run enough of these events to know exactly how to keep them moving without making them feel perfunctory. He had a deputy at the podium with him, a woman named Karen Shields, who managed the documentation, the physical certificates, the license portfolios, the folders each recipient would take home. The format was straightforward. Calloway called names in alphabetical order. Each recipient came to the front. He shook their hand. Karen handed them their folder. He said a few words about their certification. They went back to their seat. Most of the words were brief, a sentence or two, the trade, the years of work, a congratulatory note. The room was warm with the low buzz of family conversations between presentations, the occasional burst of applause, someone's toddler losing patience with the chairs. I sat and listened. I watched the other recipients, the pride in how they walked to the front, the way some of them glanced back at their families before they got there, the way a few of them had tears in their eyes just from having their name called in a room that meant something. I watched a man about my age take his folder and hold it in both hands as though it had weight, as though the weight was something he'd been waiting a long time to feel. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about the voltage tester. I thought about, yeah, that'll hold. There were 26 recipients. I was 20th alphabetically, Reyes S. So I sat through 19 names before mine. I knew it was coming. I had known for 6 weeks it was coming. I still was not prepared for the way Calloway paused when he got to my file. It was a small pause. A beat. The kind you don't notice unless you're watching for something, or unless something in the pause's texture is different from the pauses that came before it. He looked down at the folder Karen had handed him, then up at me briefly. I think he was confirming which person in the room was Simone Reyes, and then back down. He said, "Our next recipient is Simone Reyes, Reyes Integrated Trades, Fresno." I stood and walked to the front. What happened next took perhaps 90 seconds. It felt, from inside it, like a very long time. Calloway shook my hand. He said, at normal volume, the kind you use when you're speaking to a room, "Ms. Reyes, before we hand you this certificate, I want to note something for the record, because this doesn't come up often." He picked up his folder and read directly from it. Reyes Integrated Trades holds verified journeyman-level certifications in electrical, plumbing, and HVAC/R, and has been granted a Class B general contractor license with multi-trade endorsement. The board's records indicate that this is the first application from a sole proprietor, woman-owned firm in state history to achieve simultaneous certification across all 3 designated trade categories under a unified license. He looked up from the paper. License number, he said, is RIT 00001. The board assigned that number specifically. It is a record number. He handed me the folder. The room was quiet. Not the quiet of a room waiting for the next thing. A different quiet. The quiet of a room that had just received a piece of information it was still processing. Then someone near the back started clapping. Then the room followed. I stood at the front of the room with the folder in my hands. 25 other recipients. Their families behind them. A woman 2 rows back was recording on her phone. One of the journalists, the one from a local Sacramento outlet whose name I didn't know yet, had his notebook out and was writing. I looked at the folder. I looked at Robert Calloway. He nodded once. I walked back to my seat. I sat back down in the second row, alone, with the folder in my lap. The ceremony continued. The remaining 6 recipients received their certifications. I heard their names and I heard Calloway's comments, and I kept my hands flat on the folder in my lap because that was the only way I could keep them steady. The folder was not surprising to me. I had known what was in it for 6 weeks. I had known about the license number, the record designation, the board's decision to acknowledge it at the ceremony. The coordinator had told me as much on the phone. What I had not been able to predict, and what I had not let myself fully imagine in advance, because imagining things in advance is how you set yourself up for disappointment, was what it would feel like to hear it said aloud in a room full of strangers by a state official reading from an official document. It felt, if I am being precise, like something settling, like a foundation that had been there all along, under everything, finally being visible. After the ceremony, Karen Shields approached me. She was warm, professional, efficient. She asked if I had a moment for the press. There were 2 journalists, as it turned out, both local Sacramento outlets, and one of them had been tipped in advance by the board's public affairs office that the RIT 00001 designation was going to be announced today. One of them had come specifically for it. The other had come for a different recipient and had pivoted. I said yes, I had a moment. The journalist from the Sacramento Valley Business Ledger, I learned his name was Paul Trevino, introduced himself, and asked if he could ask a few questions. I said yes. He asked about the business, how long I'd been operating, what the certification process had involved, whether I'd had partners or mentors along the way. I told him about Reyes Integrated Trades. 11 years of work. The 3 journeyman cards. The application process. The municipal contracts. The business being entirely self-funded. No investors, no loans beyond the original equipment financing I'd paid off in year 4. He asked if there was anyone I wanted to credit. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about what I wanted to say carefully because I didn't want to perform gratitude in a way that felt staged, and I didn't want to introduce personal family information into a press interview, and I also didn't want to lie by omission about where this had come from. I said, "My grandfather taught me the trades. He was a contractor for 40 years, and he was the best electrician I've ever worked with. He died when I was 26. The tools in my truck are his." Trevino wrote that down. The other journalist, a woman from a local Fresno outlet called the Central Valley Dispatch, she had driven up for the day for a different story and had redirected when she overheard the room, asked a similar set of questions. She also asked whether it was meaningful, personally, to hold the record number. I said, "The work was meaningful. The record is the work being recognized. So yes." She asked if my family was here today. I said, "No, they couldn't make it." She nodded and wrote that down. I don't know what she did with it in the final article because I didn't read the article until 4 days later, but I know what I saw on her face when I said it. A flicker of something, not pity, more like recognition, the kind that passes between people who understand a particular kind of situation without needing it explained. I thanked both journalists. I thanked Karen Shields. I found Robert Calloway on his way out of the room and shook his hand again and said thank you for the acknowledgement. He said the board was genuinely pleased to be able to do it, that this kind of milestone was exactly what the certification program was designed to recognize, and that he hoped the designation would serve the business well. I picked up my folder and my jacket. I walked to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat. I put the folder on the passenger seat. I looked at the license in the sleeve inside the front panel, the cream-colored certificate, the state seal, the board's signature, and in the upper right corner, stamped in blue ink, RIT 00001. My phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Then another. Then my regular screen notifications started pulling in Instagram, then a comment notification from my business Facebook page, then a voicemail from an area code I didn't know. The Ledger had posted a short item online before I'd even gotten to my truck. Someone in the room had shared it. By the time I pulled out of the parking structure, it had been reshared 4 times on a local Fresno Facebook community page and a building trades association group I'd joined 3 years ago and mostly ignored had tagged my business page in a congratulatory post. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat next to the folder. I drove to a diner on the way out of Sacramento, sat at the counter, ordered eggs and coffee. I read the menu front to back while I waited. I ate without looking at my phone. I left a tip, walked back to the truck, and drove home. I got home at 2:30 in the afternoon. I made another cup of coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. Then I picked up my phone. There were 41 unread text messages. I want to be precise about the order in which things happened because the order matters and because I've been asked about it enough times since that I've thought through the sequence carefully. The first family member to contact me was Priya. She texted at 12:17, which was approximately 45 minutes after the Ledger piece went up. The text said, "Simone, someone just sent me this article. Oh my God, why didn't you tell us? I'm so proud of you. Can we please talk?" The second was Denise. Her text came in at 12:49. It said, "Simone, I just saw the thing in the news. I had no idea you were being recognized like that. We should celebrate, seriously. Call me." Marcus called at 1:15. I was still driving. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 3 minutes long. He said he'd seen the article. He said he was genuinely impressed. He said, "I want to be honest with you. I don't think I fully understood what you'd built, and I think I've said some things over the years that weren't fair." And then he moved fairly quickly to the observation that a Class B license with multi-trade endorsement had significant commercial real estate implications, and that his firm had several clients who were always looking for qualified contractors with exactly that kind of credential profile, and that he'd be happy to make some introductions. Derek texted at 1:52. His text said, "Hey, saw the article. Congrats, that's huge. Sorry I missed the ceremony. We should get together soon. Then there was a gap, and then my mother called at 2:41. I was at my kitchen table by then. I had the folder open in front of me. I'd been looking at the license, not reading it, just looking at the state seal and the ink and the number in the corner. I answered. She said, "Simone." I said, "Hi, Mom." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I saw the news." I didn't say anything. She said, "I didn't know. I didn't know about the record." I said, "I know." She said, "I should have been there." I said, "Yes." Another pause. Then, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you." Something in my chest went very still when she said that. Not the way things go still when you're hurt. The way things go still when you're deciding something. I said, "Mom, you texted me this morning that you'd celebrate when I did something real." She was quiet. I said, "I need you to understand that what I do is real. It has always been real. That's all I need from you." She said, "I know. You're right. I'm sorry." I believed her. I want to be clear about that. I believed her. I don't think she was performing the apology. I think seeing your daughter's name in a news article, tied to a state record, having chosen not to be in the room when it happened, produces a particular and clarifying kind of understanding that perhaps nothing else could have. I also believe that the apology was real, and that the pattern that produced the text message was also real, and that both things can be true simultaneously, and that one phone call doesn't undo 11 years. We talked for 22 minutes. We didn't resolve anything, not in the deep sense. But we talked, and she listened when I spoke, and she didn't interrupt or redirect, and she said she was sorry twice more before we hung up. That was more than I'd had from her in a long time. Over the following days, the calls and texts continued. The Building Trades Association invited me to speak at their regional conference. A woman who'd been trying to find a certified 3-trade contractor for a commercial remodel she was managing sent a project inquiry that was 3 times the size of anything I'd bid on before. 2 different contractors I'd worked alongside as a subcontractor years back called to ask if I was taking on associates or junior partners. Marcus sent a formal email, the kind he writes for professional contacts, with paragraph structure and a signature block, introducing me to 2 of his clients. I responded professionally. I haven't pursued it yet. I'm still thinking about what I want that relationship to look like. Denise texted twice more asking to get together. I said yes, let's do that. We haven't set a date. I'm not avoiding it. I'm not rushing it either. Priya and I did talk. We talked on the phone for an hour and a half, which is longer than we'd talked in years. She asked me a lot of questions, real ones, about the trades, about how I'd built the business, about what the certification process had involved. She seemed genuinely curious in a way she hadn't been before. I don't know what to make of that yet. I'm trying to take it at face value. The Central Valley Dispatch piece ran the following Thursday. It was longer than the Ledger item, more biographical. It mentioned my grandfather. It mentioned that my family had not been present at the ceremony. I had not said that explicitly to the reporter. I had said only that they couldn't make it, but the piece noted it, briefly, in a single sentence, in a tone that was neither pointed nor apologetic. Just factual. Denise called the day that piece ran. She said, "I saw the other article." I said, "I know." She said, "It said we weren't there." I said, "You weren't." She said, "Simone, I didn't know it was going to be. I didn't realize." I said, "I told you what it was. I told all of you. You didn't ask any questions." She was quiet for a long time. She said, "I know." I told her I wasn't angry. That was true. I wasn't angry. I was something else, something more final, more settled, something that doesn't have a clean, common name. I was standing on ground I'd built myself, and it was holding, and I was trying to figure out who I wanted to let stand on it with me. That's still the question I'm working through. Here is what I know for certain after 31 years and 11 years of work and 1 Saturday morning in Sacramento. Credentials don't create worth. They confirm what was already there, to audiences that needed the confirmation. The work was real before the record existed. The foundation was there before anyone read the number out loud. If nobody had read that number, if the room had been empty, If the ceremony had been cancelled, the work still would have held. My grandfather knew that. He knew it the way people know things they've tested with their hands. That'll hold. That was never about approval. It was about structure. About whether the thing you built was built right. I spent a long time meeting the people who raised me to see what I'd built and say that it was real. I understand why I needed that. I also understand, now, standing on the other side of a particular Saturday, that the needing was mine to carry, and that I have been carrying it long enough. That's my story. A voltage tester in a Fresno garage, a license folder in a Sacramento ceremony room, and a text message I read in a parking lot that I've decided to keep, not as a wound, but as a marker. A coordinate. The last point on a map of something I've been navigating for a very long time. That's it. That's the whole thing. I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer. Has anyone in your life, a parent, a sibling, someone whose opinion you were shaped by, told you, directly or by omission, that what you were building wasn't real? And if they changed their mind later, when the world confirmed it, did that change land the way you'd always imagined it would? Drop your answer in the comments. I mean that, I read every single one, and these are the responses I look forward to most. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.